morning, everyone. Welcome to day 3. Thank you for coming to such an early session, 8 o'clock, I know. Having presented Saturday morning at the American Academy, we usually don't get this very many people, so thanks for coming. It's much appreciated. Like I said, this is day 3. Just a reminder for those of you with the speaker green tags to sign in to get your money at the end of the week. Also, for those of you in SWGMAT, there is going to be a 1:30 meeting at the poster session. Everyone from SWGMAT meet there, and then Maureen's going to herd us over to some other location to meet this afternoon. This session is case studies. My favorite of all these presentations is the case study stuff. So we've got a nice mixture, anywhere from body parts to gastric content to soil. It's a good mix. It's a good mix for early in the morning. So our first speaker comes from the Forensic Science Services in the UK for now. And he is Ray Palmer, a common presenter here at the Trace Evans Symposium. And so he's going to speak about the Jigsaw murders. Ray Palmer.
Well, thank you very much. And first thing I'd like to do is to thank the committee here for having me back and inviting me here. It's a great honor to turn up once again and share with you some of my experiences in casework over the time since I last saw you. This case I'm about to go through occurred around, I was working on around the time of the last symposium, which was held obviously in Florida. And it occurred between the 22nd of March and April 7th, 2009. And as you hopefully appreciate, this time frame, which I just gave you, turned out to be quite crucial. Okay, so what happened in the 22nd of March was that a severed leg was found in a bag near the village of Cottered in the county of Hertfordshire in England. It had been placed in a blue plastic rubble sack, and it had been sealed with tape, gaffer tape, duct tape, that kind of thing. And this is the bag where it was found. And inside the bag, as you can see, there's the rubble sack. And you probably appreciate from that photograph there's a fair amount of unpleasantness inside it. So out comes the package. At this point in time, of course, nobody quite knew what was inside it. But given from the shape, you can probably hazard a guess. And of course, once it was opened, you start to get the picture. Of course, the police immediately decided this was suspicious. So, one body part found, and of course, on the basis of this, an investigation was launched. And then, 29th of March, the next episode begins. A severed forearm was found near the village of Wickhampstead in the county of Hertfordshire, same county, this time a forearm. It wasn't wrapped. There was some suggestion it may have been wrapped, but in fact, due to animal activity, it had been removed from the package. And it got even better, or worse, depending on your perspective. 31st of March, a decapitated head was found, this time in the village of Ashfordby in the county of Leicestershire. Now, that's quite a geographical distance from the other two body parts. So, again, the police at this point were beginning to take notice. Investigation, and the face, tongue, and ears of this head had been removed. And at that time, I remember the police had very much kept this fact away from the media because, as they pointed out, the last thing they wanted the media picking up on and throwing through the UK networks was there's a Hannibal Lecter about. So at this point in time, this was very much kept very quiet, is the best way to say it. I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of this. 7th of April, again, so it's as you see, the pattern's beginning to emerge here, literally. A severed right leg was found in the town of Puckeridge in the county of Hertfordshire. Again, quite a distance away from where the original, the other parts were found. And like the left leg, it had been placed in a blue rubble sack, and again, it had been wrapped with tape. So here we have the rubble sack, and again, when we look inside here, now you can see that this particular item had been, how can I put it, dissected fairly skillfully. And that was to feature very much as an intelligence aspect in the early stages of the investigation. 11th of April 2009, a human torso with the right arm and upper left arm was found in the town of Standon in Hertfordshire. It was found inside a suitcase this time, inside a blue plastic sack yet again, and it had been wrapped in tape. And this is the suitcase in question. Again, opening it up, you can see it's quite an unpleasant situation to be in, particularly in terms of trace evidence recovery. Again, once we open it up, it's again a lot of unpleasantness. So, this is for those of you not familiar with the geography of the United Kingdom. This is East Anglia. This is the eastern side of England, and over here down here you've got France. And this is London, obviously. And these are locations of the body parts themselves. And this is where the head was found. So you can see it's quite a large geographical area. And for those that are interested, this is where, for the time being, the Forensic Science Service laboratory where I work is located, sort of halfway between each of the sites, really. So, what happened next? Of course, the press got a hold of this, and this is very much the kind of example that the media were throwing out at the time. Very much a sensationalist kind of approach, because at this point in time, nobody had a clue who this individual was. All the remains that had originated from one male. The body, according to the pathologist, had been skillfully dissected. Hands hadn't been found. And the press labeled, for obvious reasons, this individual as the Jigsaw Man. Very imaginative. So we had early meetings with the investigative team from the police, and we agreed a particular strategy with them. And very simply, examine the debris from the body parts and the wrappings, identify any fiber collectives which may relate to the environment where the dismemberment had taken place, or at least where the body parts themselves were wrapped. And we made a decision early on to initially concentrate on the tapes used to wrap the body parts. We took the approach that, the same approach that you perhaps use for something like an improvised explosive device, in as much as that the tapes, any debris on these tapes, is more than likely on the adhesive side would relate to the environment, or likely to relate to the environment where the wrapping had taken place. And of course, because of the nature of the wrapping, that evidence would be secured and preserved. So that was very much our approach. And of course, here you can see how the taping around the sacks had been put there, and as you can see, it's fairly tight and fairly well sealed. So our first task was really to remove these tapes and examine the adhesive side for any fibers or other trace evidence material which may be useful, and what was really very much the intelligence phase of this investigation, to try and give the team some kind of investigative lead in which they could steer their investigation. So what we did was we removed the taping, and we stuck it down onto, I'm not quite sure if you can all see this, but these are essentially clear acetate strips, which we'd normally stick our tapings to when we taped an item. So what we did was we carefully took the tapings off and we stuck it onto these acetate sheets for two reasons. One is obviously to preserve anything that was there, but secondly, it allowed us to examine these under low-power microscopy for anything that was likely to be of interest to us, and also recover it without compromising anything else that might be there, including things like, dare I say, the D word. So that was initially our approach. And it paid off, which was nice. The initial results wrapping revealed the presence of blue viscose flock collectives. Now, for those of you that were at the workshop earlier this week, we talked about non-woven textiles and their uses and distribution and such. And the flock is very much, it's made from continuous filaments or cable tow, which have been cut into small staple sections and applied to a substrate via adhesive to form a non-woven textile. And the tows are actually cut using either a rotary system or a guillotine. And as I understand it, the morphology of the fiber gives you a clue as to which one's been applied. And once you've got these fibers that have been cut up into very small sections, as I said, it's glued. And this is very much the process here. There are two different processes. So what happens is once you've cut your fiber up, it goes into this hopper. And you have this glued substrate, which has been electrostatically charged. So what happens is the little cut sections fall out of the hopper. They're forced to stand up on their ends and stick to the adhesive to form this particular non-woven textile, which is known as flock. So here we have a diagrammatic representation of it. Now, flock is, for anybody who knows about flock, there's two things that are very characteristic about it. The first thing is that it has a very velvety peach skin kind of texture to it when you touch it. Best way to describe it is it feels like a peach skin or velvet. And the second thing about it is it sheds like crazy. If you ever have any of this stuff in your laboratory, you've got a heck of a time cleaning your benches afterwards, I can assure you. But in this case, it worked to our advantage. Something like this sheds, so it's likely to be transferred. This is pictures of flock here. In fact, these are the items in question. And as you can see, the ends have been cut. And some, I'm not sure, yeah, I think this one here still got a bit of adhesive on it. So these are flock fibers. So we passed this information on to the investigative team to look out for dark blue, black items that had a peach skin or velvet texture. And so the search began. And that gave me an idea for a movie. I'm not sure Gene Roddenberry would have approved, but never mind. Meantime, some weeks before the body parts had been found, a missing persons inquiry had been underway. And as a consequence, I'll not go into the background of the missing persons inquiry. Was actually a bit of a tale in itself, but we don't have time here this morning to go into it in any great depth. But suffice it to say, after a period of time, the remains were actually identified as an individual called Geoffrey Howe. And this is Geoffrey. He was age 49, and he lived at flat 13, Fernwood Court, Picard Close, nothing to do with Star Trek, in North London. He was quite an interesting character, very ineffectual man by all accounts, very pleasant to deal with. As I understand it, he worked as a chef in Italy at one point in time, and latterly he had worked as a kitchen salesman, kitchen fitting salesman. Police went round to his last known address, knocked on the door, And this individual called Sarah Bush opened the door, and to which the investigating officer said, "Well, who are you? What are you doing here?" "Oh," she said, I'm lodging at this address, Geoffrey Howe's, I'm Geoffrey Howe's lodger. I've moved in here." "Okay, where's Geoffrey Howe?" "Oh, he went off on holiday somewhere. I don't know where he's been. He's been away for some weeks now. He never told me where he went. He just packed his bags and left." So police weren't entirely convinced about this individual, so they did a little bit checking on her. And it turned out she was a girlfriend of an individual called Stephen Marshall. And this is Stephen. He was an associate of Geoffrey Howe. He worked beside him at the carpet sales shop. He had a history of violent behavior. He was an extremely large individual, 6 foot, well over 6 foot, 6.5 feet. He was a bodybuilder, and he had a history, as I say, of violent behavior. So the police interviewed this chap and weren't satisfied with his explanation as well. He said, "Well, I moved in with my girlfriend because Geoffrey's moved out," and they just weren't at all happy with the answers they were getting from him. And I remember the police officer telling me that when he wasn't happy about the answers he was getting from Stephen, he thought, "Gosh, I'm going to have to arrest this guy." And bearing in mind that the police officer's maybe my height and the height of this guy, and huge, he thought to himself, "What do I do if he doesn't want to come?" Fortunately, Stephen was in a good mood that day and decided to comply with the request to go to the police station. They were both questioned. As I say, the inquiry team were very unhappy with the responses to the questions that they'd given these individuals. So both were arrested, and a decision was taken to search the house. There was very little actually in the house itself, the flat rather, the apartment. However, a source of flock was identified based upon the characteristics that we supplied to the team. And in fact, it was one of these inflatable mattresses. 4 inflatable mattresses were found, 3 of which were identical in terms of the design, color, and brand, which was a camping gas brand. And you can see here that you've got this plastic inflatable bag, and on the top, this is all flock. Okay, so it's a large surface area of flock fibers there. And not surprisingly, it shed like crazy. Well, all 3 of them did. And the 4th mattress differed. It was an Asda brand. Asda's a big supermarket chain in the UK. And instead of being purely viscose flock, as in the other 3, it was also composed of polyester. It's a mixture of polyester and viscose flock. And the color was subtly different from the other 3. We could distinguish between the color using MSP quite easily. So extended the fiber search to not only to the tapes itself, but also to the rubble sacks, packing, and other items relating to the suspects. And as a consequence of that, what we found was quite a number of associations relating to the flock itself. We found flock in the left leg, the duct tape, rubble sacks. We found them in Stephen Marshall's car. We found it in the carpet, and not surprisingly, the carpet in the living room. Now, it might seem, well, why did you bother with the carpet in the living room when that's where you found them? Hopefully that will become clear. We hadn't gone loopy. It was also in the torso, and it was in a knife case belonging to Marshall as well. It was sort of kind of everywhere. So as I say, these are the associations we found as far as the flock was concerned. Okay, so we had a problem. And that problem is that we found fibers from all 4 of these mattresses in Marshall's environment, i.e. on the carpet, in his car. But we found only fibers of the 3 mattresses present on the items relating to the body parts. Now, bear in mind what we said about the fact that flock sheds very well. That was contrary to expectations. And certainly, from a defense perspective, they say, well, you've obviously got the wrong environment. So that was a bit of a problem for us at that point in time. So we decided to press on regardless of that, and hopefully we thought we might be able to resolve it. We found further collectives in our search, and we found green and red polyester fibers. And the decision was taken to screen items in this apartment for any likely sources, and again we found matches. And we found these green polyester fibers with flamed ends, which matched this custom kit polo shirt, which was found in a laundry bag in the apartment. And a little clue as to who may have worn this was the fact, if you look at the label, or I think you call it a tag, it's an extra, extra, extra large. And the tag has a code on it, like most tags. I'm not quite sure if you can see what the number is, but it's reasonably relevant in this case. And it had this bodybuilding logo on it as well. And this formed the basis of our industrial inquiry, because at this point in time, Marshall had gone no comment to everything that was being asked of him. So we performed this industrial inquiry, and what that told us was that the polo shirts had been made by a company called Charterhouse Holdings. And the label code that showed that this item was among only 3,000 items that sold between 2001 and 2004. But bearing in mind 3,000 might sound a lot, but in the context of a national distribution, in fact international distribution, it's actually very, 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 very few items that you're likely to encounter. There had been at least one change in die batch since it was in production, so that further narrowed the likelihood of coming in contact with a particular item. The items were sold by mail order to companies, of which custom kit were only one. The custom kit provided the item and embroidered a logo as ordered by the gym that was frequented by Stephen Marshall. We also found this maroon T-shirt. And again, all these things started to link to the accused, from the accused to the victim. And even down to this other item, maroon T-shirt, which again was present on items from the torso. That still hadn't helped us with this problem regarding the mattress. Now, in the apartment, we found this packaging material which seemed to relate to this mattress in question, the one which was composed of a mixture of polyester and viscose flock. You can see on the right here, these are the photographs of the particular valves that were on the item, and these were the actual ones on the mattress itself. So we were fairly confident that this particular packaging related to that particular mattress, the one that was causing us the problem. But at this point in time, we were still perplexed as to why we were not finding collectives relating to this thing on the victim when we had expected to see it. But fortunately, we were able to resolve that problem. Decided to go back and review the items from the apartment, and through good detective work by the police scenes of crime people, they actually found a receipt for the purchase of an Asda inflatable mattress. The date on the receipt showed that it was purchased on the 18th of April, and of course that means it hadn't been introduced to the environment, Marshall's environment, until after the discovery of the body parts. So it couldn't, the reason we weren't finding it, because it wasn't there at the time the body was wrapped up. So a nice little bit of detective work there, which actually helped us resolve this particular quandary we had, this incongruous finding. So, as we talked about yesterday, we used the Bayesian System in the UK, and our conclusion was that the body parts of Geoffrey Howe had been packaged with an environment of 13 Fernwood Court, whilst Stephen Marshall was living there. Stephen Marshall, initially at the trial, admitted to dismembering Geoffrey Howe, but denied killing him. He initially had gone no comment, but once he'd actually seen our statement regarding the fibre evidence, he changed his story to this particular version. But during the trial, actually, the third week, he actually pled guilty to homicide, and Bush pled guilty to perverting the course of justice. She was involved in the killing. She initially denied any participation, but decided, I think when Marshall had admitted to the homicide, that I think she was left with no other alternative but to put her hands up as well. Marshall alleged he'd performed a number of previous disposals for the underworld bosses, and consequently this was all over the media, and I don't think he was very popular with these individuals in question. Hence his apparent skill in dissection and disposal, which was catalogued by the pathologist. Marshall was jailed for 36 years. Sarah Bush was jailed for 3 years and 9 months. So what was the motive for this? Quite simply, greed. Howe allowed Marshall and Bush to move into his home after they were thrown out of Sarah Bush's mother's house. Apparently, Stephen Marshall had threatened Bush's mother with violence, or had been violent. I'm not sure which was the way around, and they were thrown out. And Geoffrey Howe, being a colleague of Marshall's, had allowed him into his home to stay there for a while. They paid him no rent. They stole his food and refused to leave. After killing him, they tried to empty his bank account, but it turned out the poor man didn't have much money anyway. Tried to get hold of his assets by identity theft, and even sold his car on eBay. Not very nice individuals, really. Not the sort of lodgers you would like, really. So that's essentially, I think it's quite a nice case. It exemplifies the use, again, of fibres as an intelligence tool, and it exemplifies the values of industrial inquiries and thorough scene examinations by CSIs. So again, I'd like to thank you very much, particularly at this early time in the morning where you're probably still a bit half asleep and waiting for your morning coffee. And again, thank you for listening.